What if the sun itself once fled the world? You know, if the great Apollo, lord of light, vanished into the farthest north, past the lands of men and memory. A hush rolls through that thought, like wind sliding over frost-bitten mountains. You picture the horizon bleeding gold while an unseen chariot wheels away into polar twilight. The air smells of salt and ice, of something half-real, half-whispered through centuries. It sounds grand, maybe even absurd, and that's the beauty of it. Myths don't check their GPS. They drift, they glow, and sometimes they hide a heartbeat of truth inside their exaggeration. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see where this story finds you tonight, because you're about to travel not in miles, but in the shiver that runs through history when light meets legend. The name you'll chase is Hyperborea, the land beyond Boreas, the north wind himself. Ancient poets said it never knew winter. Philosophers said it was a metaphor. Conspiracy theorists say it's still out there under the ice, maybe with Wi-Fi and better coffee. You smile, unsure whether to laugh or lean closer. Snow gathers in your mind's eye. Each flake is a fragment of record Herodotus, scribbling rumors from travelers. Pindar composing odes to immortal northerners who worship Apollo without sickness or sorrow. You begin to see the god not as statue or symbol, but as a migrant spirit following some celestial pattern. Historians still argue whether those migrations reflect forgotten trade routes or pure poetic imagination. Yet the rhythm persists. Apollo departs Greece every winter, leaving Delphi silent, and returns with spring's first hymn. That's the mainstream fact, the liturgical heartbeat of classical religion. You imagine it from the inside. Temples stand empty, their bronze mirrors dull beneath drifting dust. Priests murmur that the god has gone to Hyperborea. Where is that exactly? They shrug. Lift their hands, gesture vaguely northward. Maybe near the river. Eridanos, maybe past the Riparian Mountains. Names that sound like code words more than coordinates. The ancients weren't bad at maps. They were bad at admitting they didn't know. So when they hit the edge of the known, they filled it with perfection. A fringe detail surfaces one of those delightful oddities certain Greek coins show. Apollo's tripod resting on a swan gliding north. The swan, sacred bird of prophecy, becomes his seasonal Uber. You can almost hear wings brushing frost as the god dozes en route to his polar retreat. It's ridiculous and sublime, at once the sort of imagery that makes academics sigh and poets grin. You follow him across a mental seascape. The Aegean shrinks behind you, and the sky turns a colder blue. The stars hang lower, brighter, like lanterns guiding your passage. Somewhere beyond those stars lies the notion of a place where no one ages, where music is medicine, and truth has no sting. That idea has outlived every empire that tried to measure latitude. Now the narrative breathes slower. You pass villages where fishermen claim to see auroras like rivers of fire. A child points north and says, "That's where the sun sleeps." You half believe him. The myth and the meteorology blend until you can't tell if Hyperborea is heaven on earth or simply the human wish for peace projected onto ice. Scholars keep trying to separate metaphor from migration. Some argue the Hyperboreans were real tribes, perhaps Finnic, perhaps Baltic, whose gifts of amber and song drifted south and grew divine in translation. Others insist it's all symbolic theatre, the north as the mind's horizon. The debate itself is ancient, echoing through dusty seminar rooms with the same tension as temple choirs millennia ago. Still you feel that tug, the narrative gravity of a god heading toward cold clarity. Maybe Hyperborea isn't a place, but a condition the moment light withdraws so it can be missed. The Greeks, so alive to contrast, built faith on that cycle. The absence of Apollo proved his return. Like the low battery warning before dawn, darkness was part of the show. You breathe in the frozen air of that mythic latitude. It tastes metallic electric. Somewhere a harp string trembles, not quite music yet. The wind carries voices that could be ancient prayers or just the whistling of your own curiosity. You realize myths survive because they satisfy both the need for wonder and the itch for explanation. The god's chariot fades into the polar haze. Behind him, a trail of gold dust merges with aurora. You can't follow physically, but your imagination drafts a passport anyway. The visa is belief, the stamp is doubt. Together they open the door. Before you cross, one last modern aside sneaks in a joke to keep the mood human. If Hyperborea truly exists, it probably has no tourists yet, just one local complaining about the eternal daylight messing up their sleep schedule. You smile again, warmth against the chill. Somewhere inside that smile is the reason you listen, because every culture hides a north, a place where truth goes when the world grows noisy. Tonight you step toward it, guided by the fading laughter of a sun god who knows that even radiance needs rest. You walk deeper into that whispering night, following the trail of parchment and rumor left by the ancients. The voices that first breathed life into Hyperborea belong to poets and historians who lived before maps had edges sharp enough to bite. You hear Herodotus, curious and careful, scribbling his paradoxes in the 5th century BCE. He insists he never met anyone who had seen Hyperborea, but he records the tale anyway, because a good historian in his age was also part dream collector. According to his scrolls, gifts from that northern people traveled south, passing through unknown tribes until they reached Delos, the island of Apollo's birth. That, he says, is proof enough that someone lives beyond the north wind. It's as if you found a seashell in the desert and built a continent around it. Then Pindar sings. In his odes, Hyperborea shines brighter, a land of eternal sun, where the muse dances and the lyre never breaks a string. His words have rhythm and certainty, and you can feel him smiling as he composes, perhaps knowing the perfection he describes would shrivel under daylight truth. Yet his vision endures because humans prefer possibility to precision. The mainstream fact here is simple Pindar, along with Hesiod and others made Hyperborea, a literary compass pointing toward the unreachable proof that even Greece needed a somewhere better. Between their lines you notice a shift. For Herodotus, Hyperborea is geography tinged with wonder. For Pindar, it's theology wrapped in melody. Historians still argue whether these poets referred to an actual northern tribe or to a mythic state of divine harmony. One camp waves archaeological fragments, another waves metaphors. Both agree that the story's longevity matters more than its coordinates. You tread on that blurred border where myth and memory exchange passports. In your mind's eye, the Hyperboreans become real enough to greet. They wear linen light as mist, they speak in tones that hum like wind through pine, and they never hurry. Their festivals for Apollo stretch across months of daylight, that never dims their temples carved from stone, that sings when the sun hits it right. You pause, half entranced, half skeptical. A quirky fragment drifts from later sources. Some writers claimed the Hyperboreans had heads of cranes or could live 1,000 years sustained by fragrant herbs. It's the sort of exaggeration that makes you grin, imagining an ancient scribe bored after lunch inventing details to impress his patron. Yet behind the strangeness, you sense admiration, the Greeks' admission that perfection might look inhuman only because they could not imagine themselves without flaw. The wind sharpens, carrying echoes of other tongues. Beyond the Hellenic coast you hear Scythian riders murmuring legends of a golden-haired people who vanished into the sunrise. Perhaps the Greek merchants who traded with them took those stories home, dressing nomads in divine robes. You picture campfires meeting sea breezes, stories swapping faces the way coins swap hands. That's how myths migrate, by gossip more durable than granite. You crouch beside an imaginary fire parchment spread on your knees, sketching the connections. Every tale about Hyperborea begins with a direction north and ends with desire. You realize that the north in these accounts is never cold in spirit. It's luminous, forgiving. To the Mediterranean mind, it's where the fever breaks, where ambition finally rests. That alone explains why a sun god would travel there, not to escape winter, but to experience peace beyond heat. One mainstream historical pulse beats through this mist. The Greeks genuinely associated wind directions with divine personalities. Boreas the north wind was fierce and icy, Zephyrus the west gentle, Notus the south heavy with rain. So when storytellers said beyond Boreas, they meant beyond the reach of harm. The etymology itself is a charm disguised as cartography. The crackle of your campfire bends into modern reflection. You think of how every age invents its own Hyperborea. For Renaissance explorers, it was a literal pole. For Victorian mystics, a cradle of lost wisdom. For internet wanderers, perhaps a metaphorical server in the cloud where algorithms sleep. The pattern repeats, light retreats, humans chase. You chuckle softly. There's your first joke here, imagining Apollo scrolling memes under polar auroras. But humor melts into awe again as you picture Delos, that tiny island temple, gleaming like a pearl, waiting each year for gifts, supposedly from this unreachable north. Somewhere between poetry and shipping routes, faith built a bridge. The offerings might have come from tribes around the Black Sea, filtered through 1,000 hands until rumor sanctified them. You feel the humanity of that act, the longing to send something beautiful into mystery and pretend it came back blessed. Historians still argue whether those gifts from the north correspond to real trade in amber or purely ceremonial invention. Some point to archaeological finds of Baltic amber in Greek tombs as physical footprints of the myth. Others caution that trade need not mean Hyperborea. The ancient world loved to overinterpret coincidence. The debate hums like background music, and you let it play. Your journey continues through libraries and wind alike. In one corner of your mind stands Herodotus, the early geographer who first hinted at lands beyond the known. In another, Diodorus Siculus, who centuries later expanded the myth, describing Hyperborea as an island larger than Sicily, near the rising sun, ringed by ocean, where Apollo visits every 19 years. That last detail, the 19-year cycle, matches the Metonic calendar, linking lunar and solar years. Coincidence or encoded astronomy? Historians still argue whether Diodorus recorded myth or early science disguised as song. You savor the ambiguity like wine that won't decide whether it's sweet. Night deepens. The constellations rotate overhead. Orion hunts eternally, pointing his belt toward the unseen pole. You sense Apollo somewhere beyond that horizon, humming with the cosmic patience of a star waiting to rise again. The cold doesn't bite anymore, it clarifies. Before sleep, a final flicker of humor. If you ever meet a Hyperborean, ask for their skincare routine. Living without aging must involve SPF 10,000. The laughter keeps your breath warm, but beneath it lies reverence, the kind born when myth refuses to die, because it still teaches comfort. You realize that to listen to these whispers from Greek sources is to admit that storytelling is humanity's oldest compass. It may wobble, but it always points toward wonder. You awaken beneath a sky the color of pewter, the air neither night nor day, but some patient in-between. The trail of the god is faint like gold dust pressed into snow. You begin to follow, though no footprints mark the way, only the feeling that every ray of light inclines northward as if even sunlight obeys a migration schedule. The old hymns said that when Apollo leaves Greece, the days shorten, and when he returns, spring ignites. It sounds poetic, but you recognize the simple astronomy buried within the tilt of the earth, the sun's apparent journey south and back again. The myth is just celestial geometry wrapped in melody. That's the mainstream fact. Still, the poets were not content with geometry. They gave the journey a purpose. In their telling, Apollo tires of prophecy and praise of mortals begging for fortune, like children shaking coins. Each winter he departs to rest among perfect beings who need no oracles. That picture, strangely domestic, a god on holiday, makes you smile. Maybe even divinity needs an out-of-office message. Yet there's reverence here too. Absence becomes renewal. Delphi's oracle falls silent, not because the priestess is cold, but because the god is elsewhere, gathering calm. Historians still argue whether the myth reflects the seasonal closure of the sanctuary or a memory of actual ritual migration, perhaps a festival that honored his northern sojourn. The temple at Delphi did in fact shut down in the cold months. The Pythia ceased her prophecies. Pilgrims found the shrine locked the tripod cool. To an ancient mind, silence demanded explanation. And so a legend bloomed. Apollo had flown north. You walk in his wake, passing imaginary coastlines where the sea freezes into marble. The chariot horses, once of flame, now snort frost. You hear the music of hooves over glass. A fringe account whispers that swans draw his car instead of horses during this journey, their white wings flashing like moonlight on ice. It's a lovely substitution, gentler, almost tender. You picture the god reclining a lyre across his knees, while the world below sleeps in winter. A gust brings you laughter, faint but human. Perhaps the Hyperboreans themselves greet him with songs, each note a sunbeam plucked from the horizon. You imagine what kind of society would suit such a visitor, serene, generous, free of envy. Their festivals would have no competition, their prayers no fear. To live in endless day, you muse, might mean never needing hope. Hope is a currency of darkness. That thought chills you more than the wind. Modern comparisons flicker through your head. You've heard of Scandinavia's midnight sun, of Arctic summers when night never comes. The ancients knew none of this, yet they guessed. Mariners told of lands where day stretched beyond reason. Traders returned with tales of white nights and people who slept by instinct rather than sunset. Those scraps of truth probably seeded the myth. Historians still argue whether such reports reached Greece early enough to influence Apollo's itinerary. Some say yes, Phoenician sailors, after all, reached Britain. Others dismiss it as coincidence. The debate glows like a distant aurora, beautiful, inconclusive. As you continue northward in imagination, the landscape simplifies. Mountains flatten into plains brushed with light. Rivers flow so slowly they seem thoughtful. You sense time thinning, as if each step peels away a century. In this hush, you begin to understand why the Greeks pictured perfection in stillness. For them, noise meant decay, motion meant mortality. To stop was to transcend. Apollo, god of order, would naturally seek the one place where nothing unravels. A quirky notion slides into mind. Some 19th century writers claimed that Hyperborea encoded memories of a real polar civilization that flourished before an ice age flood. You picture earnest Victorians in waistcoats connecting Greek hymns to imaginary Atlanteans with compasses. It's nonsense mostly, but charming nonsense. Humanity can't resist promoting myths to history once every century. You smirk, then forgive them. Imagination is how we keep boredom from becoming fossilized. The wind hardens. Around you shadows lengthen into pillars of ice that almost resemble temples. You trace your glove over one, and for a heartbeat it hums. Maybe sound behaves differently here. Maybe the stone remembers prayers. The hum modulates into a chord you half recognize, the Delphic hymn to Apollo, rediscovered on marble in the modern age. That's another fact, real notation carved above the theatre of Delphi, proof that myth once had melody. The past literally sings back. You follow the echo until it merges with surf. The coastline of imagination turns ragged, dotted with frost-capped islands. Somewhere among them lies the line, no sailor crosses the border between chart and conjecture. Apollo's chariot passes overhead, leaving streaks of color that might be dawn or memory. You lift your face, feeling warmth through the cold, and realize the paradox that keeps the story alive. The further north the god flies, the closer he comes to home. Because home in myth is not a place, it's balance. The Greeks imagined harmony as a golden mean poised between extremes. The north in their cosmic geography isn't simply far, it's pure, undistorted by desire. So Apollo's migration becomes moral geometry, a journey away from chaos toward clarity. You breathe out, watching your breath crystallize into miniature halos. And yes, amid this solemnity, a playful thought intrudes. Maybe Apollo just preferred fewer festivals in winter. Even immortals need quiet after a year of human drama. You chuckle softly at the idea of him hiding behind an iceberg, muttering, "No more lyre requests, please." Humor doesn't cheapen myth, it ventilates it. The path bends upward toward a horizon painted in violet. You can no longer tell if you're climbing sky or thought. Each step lightens you as if disbelief is baggage being shed. The notion of a god's seasonal commute no longer feels absurd. It feels like a reflection of your own cycles, burnout and retreat, noise and silence, creation and rest. Perhaps that's why the tale persists, because everyone, mortal or divine, needs a north to disappear into. The wind finally stills. Ahead, a shimmer like glass water spreads into infinity. Somewhere beyond it lies the blessed island, waiting with songs that never fade. You pause, understanding that pursuit is part of worship. The myth never intended you to arrive, only to walk, listening for the faint sound of wings over snow. You feel the rhythm change slower, ceremonial like footsteps tracing an ancient procession. The road you follow becomes narrow, paved with memories of song. Far ahead shimmer two silhouettes, women in flowing linen hair braided with reeds, arms heavy with offerings wrapped in leaves of gold. They are Hyperoche and Laodite, the Hyperborean maidens. You've heard their names in fragments tucked between hymns and commentaries, yet now they move before you as if they have never stopped walking. The Greeks said they journeyed from the farthest north to Delos, carrying sacred gifts for the birth of Apollo. The route was impossible, mountains, seas, languages, and centuries apart. But myth is not bothered by geography. It measures distance by devotion. You step closer, hearing the rustle of their garments, the creak of wicker baskets filled with wheat and laurel. The air smells faintly of snow and honey. The mainstream historical fact whispers beside the poetry. Delos was indeed a major cult center for Apollo, its festivals drawing pilgrims from across the Aegean. Offerings arrived there annually, some said, from the Hyperboreans. Archaeologists have found ceremonial paths, inscriptions praising the northern donors, and evidence that women, real not mythic, played key roles in the processions. That's how myth and ritual interlaced, metaphor worn into muscle memory. Still, historians argue whether the Hyperborean maidens were purely symbolic or preserved a memory of foreign envoys from northern tribes. Some point to the use of amber, rare in Greece, abundant in the Baltic, as a hint of ancient trade. Others dismiss this, insisting the tale was theological theatre, the north sending purity to the cradle of light. The debate continues, endless, as the road the maidens walk. You join their procession. Around you march unseen companions, dancers, poets maybe. pilgrims who believe that to follow these women is to glimpse the architecture of faith itself. Each footstep becomes a syllable. Together they form a hymn. The sound is low, steady, hauntingly familiar. You realize it's a heartbeat, the Earth's, or maybe your own. One fringe detail glimmers in the distance. Later storytellers added that Hyperoque and Laodike never returned. After delivering their gifts, they died on Delos, buried beneath temple stones, honored forever. 2 more maidens were sent later and later still, until the journey became perpetual. Death folded into devotion, devotion into myth. You can sense the echo of that rhythm in modern rituals. The idea that some tasks never end because they symbolize endurance itself. As you walk, your senses expand. The sunlight feels warmer, yet its warmth seems borrowed, as if the god's infancy on Delos still radiates through millennia. You imagine the island, then waves murmuring against white rock palm trees, bending in reverent arcs, the cries of gulls blending with the chanting of priestesses. The Hyperborean maidens arrive exhausted, but smiling, their journey collapsing into blessing. They place their baskets before the newborn god, and the myth snaps shut like a clasp. A path of light stretches backward toward the horizon, but no one follows it home. You glance north, trying to see where they came from. The line between sea and sky blurs. It could be the world's edge, or just your imagination refusing to admit limits. Somewhere beyond that haze lies Hyperborea, still waiting untouched by time. You feel an ache of recognition, the human urge to connect faraway perfection with mortal duty. Maybe the Hyperborean maidens are every traveler who carries something sacred through uncertainty. A gust lifts the hem of your cloak, and for a moment the sand beneath your feet becomes snow again. You see footprints overlaying yours light as breath. You whisper their names aloud. The sound lingers longer than expected, as if the island listens. Historians still argue whether this legend encoded an annual relay of offerings or was merely poetic imagery. A few adventurous scholars suggest a proto-Olympic relay passing goods from tribe to tribe, mimicking the tale. Others roll their eyes, but you sense a truth beyond logistics. The story exists because people needed to believe generosity could survive the distances that politics weather and mortality impose. You kneel by the imagined altar. The sea glitters like molten glass, the sky a mirrored dome. You picture Apollo as a child of light, his eyes reflecting every compass point at once. The maidens' hands tremble as they lay down their gifts. One of them laughs softly the way someone laughs at the end of a long ordeal. The sound transforms the air. You realize that laughter, gentle, weary, grateful, is also worship. A humorous thought drifts through. If these maidens really hiked from the Arctic to the Aegean, they must have invented endurance sports long before Nike. Maybe that's why the gods rewarded them with immortality in song. You grin, and even the sea seems to join in splashing applause. Then quiet returns. The offerings rest, and Delos becomes a navel of worlds, north meeting south, myth touching earth. You stand among invisible pilgrims who murmur prayers of balance, that every journey finds a home, that every giver receives warmth in return. You realize you've been walking in circles. Delos dissolves into snow. The horizon folds north again. The road doesn't end. It loops as myths do. So each retelling becomes another procession. You can almost see the next pair of maidens waiting for their cue. Their faces blur between ancient and modern. Perhaps scientists chasing auroras, artists seeking beauty, anyone who carries light toward dark. The wind changes key. A faint harp note trembles on it, maybe a signal that Apollo has stirred from his infancy and already eyes the horizon. The god will grow, will travel, will leave again. You too will keep walking, following the song wherever it leads north, always north. The horizon widens, tilting like a frozen compass. You stand between constellations and coastlines, maps flapping around your ankles like nervous birds. The ink on these maps is old Greek, Roman, Renaissance, each claiming to know where Hyperborea hides, each quietly contradicting the others. The cartographer's hands trembled not from cold, but from doubt. To map the unimaginable requires arrogance or faith. Perhaps both. You unfold one parchment in your mind, the world, according to Herodotus, ringed by Oceanus, north capped by mist. Beyond Scythia he scribbled rumors of the Riphaean mountains, and then blankness. The land beyond the north wind. That phrase alone has launched more expeditions than any royal decree. You imagine him muttering, "Let future fools find it," and of course, future fools obliged. The mainstream historical fact gleams clearly. Ancient geographers truly did believe the world's edge lay somewhere north of the Black Sea, perhaps near modern Ukraine or southern Russia. Hyperborea became shorthand for the unreachable north. But then Pytheas of Massalia, the Greek explorer, around 320 BCE, sailed beyond Britain and claimed to find a land he called Thule, 6 days further into fog, where the sun barely set. Historians still argue whether Thule was Iceland, Norway, or just the hallucination of a sailor drunk on latitude. Yet once Pytheas returned, Hyperborea had a candidate. You trace his route with your imagination, waves black as ink under a restless sky. He speaks of frozen seas that behave like jelly of fish, the size of boats, of people who worship the sun in silent awe. The Greeks heard these tales and stitched them into existing myth. Thule Hyperborea. 2 syllables for one dream. A fringe tidbit flutters in medieval monks later drew Hyperborea as 4 circular continents surrounding a whirlpool at the pole with rivers flowing inward to a magnetic mountain. It's the kind of cosmology that would make Google Maps combust, but there's beauty in its symmetry. You can almost feel the compass needle quiver toward that mountain, as though magnetism itself were homesick. You climb through that imaginary geography. Each layer of snow crackles like vellum underfoot. The Rhypian mountains rise ahead, their peaks blurred by aurora. Some scholars believe Rhypian simply meant shaken by wind, not a real range, but a poetic placeholder for where the world turns wild. Yet over centuries the name solidified, sprouting on maps from Alexandria to London. You realize that mountains exist once they are believed in. Erasing them later is harder than climbing them. You pause fingers tracing phantom contours. Below these invented peaks, Scythian riders once galloped nomads who traded gold and stories. Maybe they spoke of another tribe farther north, one blessed by endless daylight. A merchant hearing that might add "our Hyperborea," and so the myth crept from conversation into cartography. Historians still argue whether this trickle of oral lore became the foundation of Greece's happy north. The evidence is mist-thin, but persistent like the fog you breathe now. You set camp beside an invisible river labeled Eridanos. In some versions it flows with amber instead of water. That detail always delights you, geology recast as miracle. Perhaps the Greeks heard of the amber-rich Baltic coast mistranslated resin trade into divine tears. The Baltic, after all, was reachable through many middlemen. You picture rough sailors selling lumps of gold resin to traders who never saw the source and assumed the gods themselves wept it. A perfect feedback loop of commerce and wonder. The fire you imagine crackles with cold light. Overhead the sky unrolls like parchment lit from beneath. Stars arrange themselves into old Greek constellations, the bear guarding the pole, the twins forever clasped. You realize that for people who navigated by stars, the north was not just direction, it was destiny. The pole star held still while everything else spun. Stability in motion. No wonder they placed divinity there. You unfold another map, this one drawn by 16th century hands. Mercator's projection neat lines converging into a fourfold Arctic paradise labeled Hyperborea. He had no evidence, only legacy. Yet his engraving endured, reproduced in textbooks long after satellites disproved it. The irony hums quietly: myth outlasts measurement. Maybe because maps record belief as faithfully as borders. A mischievous thought intrudes. If Jeep existed in antiquity, would Apollo still migrate? You picture the god squinting at a glowing tablet, muttering, recalculating route to Hyperborea, proceed to the highlighted sunbeam. You chuckle, the sound echoing off ice. Even deities, you suspect, would ignore low battery warnings. Beyond humor, the image holds something true. Every generation updates the divine itinerary. The ancient Greeks looked north. The Renaissance looked skyward. Modern seekers look inward. The coordinates change, the yearning doesn't. Hyperborea survives because it keeps moving just beyond the newest boundary. You press onward through the cold. The landscape blurs between mythic and modern fjords, whisper in Greek glaciers, hum. In dactylic hexameter. A seal's bark becomes an oracular riddle. Where does light sleep when men forget to look? You cannot answer, but you feel closer to understanding that Apollo's road north is less about escape than reflection. In leaving Greece, he carries civilization's noise to silence, the way a musician pauses to hear the echo of his own song. Historians still argue whether Hyperborea inspired any real expeditions or merely gave sailors courage to keep exploring. Some cite the legend as psychological fuel, the carrot of paradise driving men into uncharted waters. Others dismiss it as decorative mythology, irrelevant to navigation. Perhaps both are right. You glance at your own map and realize that curiosity too needs a horizon. You fold the parchment, tuck it under your arm, and feel warmth seep into your fingers. Strange, shouldn't the air be freezing? Then you understand belief itself radiates heat. The Greeks drew Hyperborea not because they knew it existed, but because they needed it to. When reality froze, imagination thawed. You stare into the polar dark where the map ends. The ink fades, but a faint glow persists, pulsing like a heartbeat under the ice. Maybe that's the world's oldest compass, desire itself refusing to stand still. The cold releases its grip, replaced by a deeper stillness that feels almost reverent. The landscape blurs into stone terraces, olive smoke and chanting voices. Greece again, though subdued. You find yourself on the sacred slope of Delphi, where Apollo's temple gleams in faint winter light. Or rather, it doesn't. The doors are closed, the laurel wreaths brittle the air, heavy with absence. The oracle is silent. You can hear your own breath echo through marble colonnades that once vibrated with prophecy. It's a historical certainty. Each winter, the Pythia Apollo's mouthpiece ceased her oracular duties. The sanctuary entered a season of dormancy. Scholars have long noted that during these months the cult of Dionysus temporarily took over. Wine replaced wisdom, ecstasy replaced clarity. It was as if the divine spectrum tilted rational light, fading into nocturnal fever. Historians still argue whether this rotation of gods was a symbolic balance or evidence of older local rituals woven into the Apollonian calendar. Whatever its cause, it marked the god's seasonal disappearance, the moment he was said to journey to Hyperborea. You wander the empty precinct footsteps, scattering dust. The famous "Know Thyself," carved at the temple entrance, seems to whisper irony now. How do you know yourself when even your god takes a holiday? The marble lions guarding the treasury stare through you, their eyes catching light that isn't there. You imagine priests standing here centuries ago, staring northward, calculating the return of the oracle, like farmers predicting rain. One mainstream fact tethers you to the real. The Pythian Games celebrations of music and athleticism were held in Apollo's honor every 4 years, coinciding with his supposed return from Hyperborea. The rhythm of faith became the rhythm of sport prophecy, turned into performance. You realize that even competition was a prayer disguised as spectacle. A fringe idea tickles you. Next, some esoteric writers claim the oracular vapors at Delphi came from gases leaking through fissures in the earth, their composition varying by season. When winter sealed the cracks, the oracle fell mute. Science masquerading as myth, or vice versa. You grin, half tempted to call it divine maintenance. The temple wasn't closed for mystery, it was closed for geology. Still, there's poetry in imagining Apollo himself plugging the vents before flying north. The sun dips lower, painting the columns in honeyed grey. You close your eyes and hear the ghost of a hymn, slow, measured, sung by invisible lips. Perhaps it's the farewell chant once performed before his departure, a promise to keep his name warm through the cold. The melody curls around you like incense. You sense that this silence isn't abandonment, but incubation. Even the gods need quiet to recharge their radiance. You leave Delphi and walk through sleeping villages. Farmers huddle by fires, muttering that the oracles will wake come spring. Children carve toy chariots, pretending to race the returning sun. The myth breathes beneath daily life, as natural as weather. You realize that Hyperborea has already begun its work. It's not just a destination, it's a season of the soul. Far ahead, the path forks. One trail leads to the sea, the other climbs toward a high plateau where frost gathers like thought. You choose the plateau. There you find a circle of stones arranged with impossible precision. Each one catches the first starlight. You suspect they mark the months of Apollo's absence. The ancients were meticulous recorders of cycles. Their architecture was memory in stone. Historians still argue whether such alignments reflect scientific observation or devotional art. But to you it doesn't matter. The stones do what all good myths do, they keep time with the heart. The wind hums softly. For a moment you almost see the god's chariot poised overhead, ready for the long flight north. Swans or horses, it's unclear, but their breath trails auroral ribbons across the dusk. You stand very still, letting awe replace analysis. This is what worship feels like when stripped of ceremony, standing in the cold and calling absence sacred. A flash of humor surfaces to warm the moment. You imagine Apollo leaving a gone Hyperborean back in spring sign, hanging over the temple door, maybe doodling a little sun beside his signature. The thought makes you laugh aloud, and the echo folds neatly into the quiet, like a coin dropped into a well. But behind that laughter, a solemn rhythm persists. You realize that faith, like astronomy, depends on returning points. Without departure, there can be no return. Without silence, no prophecy. The Greeks understood this instinctively, their religion pulsing with seasons rather than absolutes. Hyperborea, then, is not escapism, it's balance written into theology. You descend the mountain slowly. Mist curls around your feet like memory. In the valley below, torches glimmer from a distant festival. Dionysian revels rising as Apollonian restraint fades. You can almost taste the wine, hear the tambourines. The world turns from clarity to chaos just as planned. Perhaps Hyperborea is simply the pause that keeps the dance in rhythm. By the time you reach the riverbank, dawn is bleeding back into the sky. You feel something shift, the certainty that the god will return, that light never truly leaves, only hides. You kneel, touch the icy water, and whisper a farewell. You're not sure anyone hears. The current carries your words northward. Maybe that's all prayer ever is, a message entrusted to motion. Somewhere far beyond Boreas, the listener stirs. The river becomes a road, its surface smooth as metal beneath a pale sky. You follow it north, the current whispering trade secrets. Along its banks glint amber fragments, fossilized light, the honey of deep time. You bend to pick one up. It's warm, impossibly, as though storing sunlight from Apollo's last visit. The ancients called amber electron the same root as electricity. Even in prehistory, humans sensed a hidden current between touch and spark. Here lies a mainstream historical fact long before the Greeks wrote poetry merchants from the Mediterranean sought amber from the Baltic coast. They traced what later ages would name the Amber Road, a network of rivers and portages running through Central Europe. Jewelry from Mycenaean tombs contains Baltic resin, proof of contact across a continent. It's not impossible that the rumor of northern traders who lived with the sun drifted south with those shipments. You roll the amber in your palm. Suddenly, Hyperborea feels less like a dream and more like a trade ledger that glowed too brightly. The wind carries another scent, metal and horse sweat. From the east riders approach Scythians, wrapped in furs, bows slung low. Their speech ripples like flame. They trade pelts and stories in equal measure. One gestures skyward, describing a land where the daylight never dies, and the people need no roofs. You smile. The tale survives intact. The god of light traveling north could easily have been born from such testimony. Historians still argue whether Greek myths of Hyperborea were embroidered retellings of Scythian ethnography. Some insist on coincidence. Others hear cultural memory disguised as epic verse. A quirky tidbit reaches you through time: Greek artisans. Artisans carved small figures of Apollo, holding not a lyre, but a bundle of arrows, said to be gifts from his Hyperborean hosts. The arrow, straight and gleaming, is a perfect metaphor for the trade route itself, direct, deadly connecting worlds. One arrow flies south, another north. Knowledge moves in both directions, and somewhere mid-air they cross, creating myth. You walk alongside caravans that never existed but should have. Bronze cauldrons clank, amber beads click in wooden bowls. Geese flap overhead, heading toward milder coasts. The noise of commerce fills the silence left by Apollo's absence. You realize Hyperborea might have been the poet's translation of economy into holiness. What merchants called a route, priests called a pilgrimage. You can almost hear them bargaining over sanctity and profit. Ahead rises a market square of imagination, tents dyed with crushed berries, fires crackling under cauldrons of stew that smell faintly of pine resin. Traders speak a dozen languages, gesturing toward north with reverent hands. Beyond the ice they murmur, the air sings. You follow their gaze, and for a heartbeat you swear the sky hums like a harp string. Historians still argue whether those ancient trade paths birthed shared symbols, the sun-wheel, the swan, the golden arrow that appear in both Greek and Nordic artifacts. To some, this overlap proves a shared Indo-European heritage. To others, it's coincidence shaped by the universal admiration for shiny things. You grin at that last thought. Perhaps humanity's oldest religion was simply the worship of whatever sparkled. A cloud of snow swirls, and with it comes laughter, yours or the gods', hard to tell. The humor carries warmth. You imagine Apollo slipping coins to a merchant, whispering, "Don't tell them I was here. I'm on vacation." Maybe every rumor of Hyperborea began with a wink and good storytelling. The merchants, eager for drama, turned divine anonymity into geography. The road climbs through birch forests where trunks glow silver in perpetual dusk. Birds with red crowns dart between branches, their calls sharp as flint. You feel the magnetic pull of north in your bones, a compass older than technology. The air is thin but charged, and somewhere beyond hearing drums keep rhythm with your steps. You pause at a cairn built from translucent stones. Someone, or perhaps everyone, has left tokens here. Shells, feathers, beads of amber. You add your own, a coin engraved with Apollo's lyre. The The wind stirs almost grateful. This could be the border of myth and memory, a customs post where offerings pay the toll between worlds. Beneath your boots the soil hums with frozen sap. You imagine veins of resin stretching beneath continents, a golden web linking every altar touched by the sun's longing. Maybe Hyperborea isn't above the map, but below it, a buried continent of warmth. The thought feels absurd, yet oddly logical. Myths often hide truth in inversion. You laugh again, a short, fogged breath, and the echo returns with extra syllables as if mocking your seriousness. A scholarly aside floats into your thoughts. Pliny the Elder once wrote that amber formed from the tears of birds mourning their dead on the banks of the Eridanos River. Science later demystified it as tree resin, but the poetry remains stronger. You roll your amber bead again, feeling a pulse that might just be your heartbeat mirrored in stone. The caravan disperses. The forest opens onto tundra, shimmering with ice flowers. The sky here seems closer, almost touchable. If Hyperborea exists, it begins somewhere near this silence. The air tastes metallic, yet sweet. You kneel, pressing your ear to the ground, and for a moment you hear it, the faint vibration of a lyre plucked far above, carried through earth and resin alike. The god is on the move again. One more joke surfaces to keep frostbite at bay. If Apollo truly follows this trade route, the customs paperwork must be divine chaos. You picture border guards trying to stamp a passport made of light. The image warms you better than fire. You rise and look north. The river you followed fades into mist, but its gleam continues beyond sight. You realize that every trader, every poet, every pilgrim who dreamed of Hyperborea was chasing the same current, the exchange between light and need. Apollo's arrows, the amber's glow, the river's reflection, they all point toward that quiet bargain. The world gives darkness, the god returns radiance. You pocket the amber, feeling its warmth against your skin. Somewhere a swan calls its cry, stretching across centuries. You follow. The tundra melts into green, an impossible spring that feels older than time itself. You have crossed into the dream terrain the Greeks called Blessed Hyperborea in full bloom. The air here doesn't bite, it caresses. The snow that once crusted the horizon has become dew trembling on flowers the color of dawn. The wind moves softly, carrying scents of cedar and fruit so ripe it borders on divine excess. You realize you're breathing what myth called eternity air, untouched by decay. The poets were clear on this part. Pindar, that master of polished ecstasy, wrote that in Hyperborea no sickness comes nor aging. Every joy is theirs. That's the mainstream historical fact, the way classical literature defined perfection. You look around and it makes strange sense. The light never changes, angle shadows never lengthen. It's always morning here, though. The sun neither rises nor sets. A land without hours cannot know endings. You walk through meadows that hum like harps. Bees the size of thumbnails drift lazily between blossoms. Each wingbeat glints with sunfire. The sound is hypnotic, and for a moment you forget to doubt. Historians still argue whether such descriptions came from second-hand tales of Arctic summer, or from the poetic instinct to project paradise into remoteness. Whichever answer is right, you realize the effect is the same. Belief warms even the coldest latitude. Further ahead, you see structures that could be rapids or forests shaped by devotion. Columns of ice so pure they refract the entire sky rise in spirals crowned with flame-like blossoms that never wilt. A stream murmurs nearby, its water perfectly clear, yet when you cup it in your hands, you taste honey and salt together. Sweetness with memory. You drink and a gentle dizziness overtakes you, not of alcohol, but of revelation. Then laughter faint and human. The Hyperboreans themselves step into view. They look ordinary, heartbreakingly so tall, serene eyes like polished amber. Their expressions carry no curiosity. They already know you are coming. One gestures toward a seat carved from petrified wood. You sit. The ground vibrates softly beneath you as if some enormous creature breathes far below. A woman hands you a slice of fruit shaped like a miniature sun. You hesitate, remembering that myths warn against eating paradise. She smiles, clearly amused. Here she seems to say without words, the danger isn't in staying. It's in wanting to return. You taste it anyway. It dissolves like light on your tongue, sweet at first, then sharply nostalgic, like the flavor of a song you once knew. You ask silently because speech feels redundant how long they've lived here. One man tilts his head. We don't live. He seems to answer. We linger. Time to them is circular, not linear. Each moment folds neatly into the next. It's unsettling, almost claustrophobic in its perfection. You begin to crave imperfection, the grit of mortality that gives texture to joy. The thought surprises you. Perhaps that's the trap of eternal spring comfort, so complete it erases desire. A fringe tale from antiquity drifts into memory. Some said the Hyperboreans, though blissful, occasionally yearned for death, not from pain, but from curiosity. When weary of endless music, they would leap from cliffs into the sea, smiling, convinced they would land among stars. You glance toward the northern cliffs, shimmering in mist, and wonder if they still do. Historians still argue whether this story was moral allegory or misunderstanding. The ancients often translated longing into drama. You wander from the village, passing gardens glowing with perpetual dusk light. The sound of lyres threads through the air. Somewhere a choir sings in a language older than grief. You realize the melody echoes Apollo's hymns, as though the god never brought music here, but learned it from these people. The thought electrifies you. What if Hyperborea is not his retreat, but his origin, a place where light learned its art before descending south? That idea sends scholars into endless debate. Was Hyperborea a memory of migration, the north-to-south movement of early Indo-European peoples, or simply the mythic rationalization of solar patterns? Historians still argue whether Apollo came from the north or merely visits it, you recall, with a smile. The line between ethnography and theology remains as thin as frost. You notice something subtle. Though the sun never sets, shadows still exist, faint but real. They follow you like loyal thoughts. Even paradise can't erase contrast entirely. The Hyperboreans glance at yours intrigued, as if they've forgotten what shadows mean. Perhaps immortality dulls curiosity. Perhaps that's why they welcome travelers. Every visitor reminds them what it feels like to change. A playful thought sneaks in if tourism existed here. The brochure would be a single sentence, no refunds, no departures. Perfect weather guaranteed. You laugh quietly, and the sound startles a flock of translucent birds that take off in slow motion, their wings leaving trails of gold dust. You find yourself near a small amphitheater carved from stone veined with light. Instruments rest on pedestals, harps, flutes, drums shaped from crystal. You touch one string, and the note that escapes seems to hang forever, looping back into itself. Time refuses to proceed. You suddenly miss silence. It's then you understand endless spring is beautiful, but it lacks rhythm. There is no anticipation without winter. Apollo's migrations aren't whims, they're necessity. Even gods need contrast to stay divine. The Hyperboreans watch you stand and prepare to leave. No one stops you. Departure is their most sacred rite. One of them raises a hand in blessing, a gesture that could also mean farewell. You look back once, and the landscape flickers flowers to frost, sunlight to aurora, life to legend. The transition feels kind like a book closing itself. You carry a single blossom with you, though when you check again it has turned into amber. Inside the resin glows a tiny bubble of air, perfectly preserved. Maybe that's how Hyperborea survives in pockets of wonder trapped inside ordinary things. You begin walking south again, though directions mean little now. Behind you, paradise keeps humming, patient as ever. Ahead lies the long road of seasons where perfection must be earned rather than inherited. You tighten your grip on the amber. It pulses faintly warm with borrowed eternity. You have left the gentle meadows of Hyperborea behind, but its afterglow follows like perfume on your coat. The air grows thinner, sharper, and the sky expands into a dome of shifting light. At first you mistake it for dawn. Then you realize the colors move too quickly, weaving in ribbons of emerald violet and rose. The aurora dances an orchestra of magnetism. It's the kind of spectacle that makes both scientists and poets nod in mutual surrender. Some mysteries demand worship, first explanation later. The ancients, of course, had no name for aurora. They called it omen, herald, miracle. Herodotus mentioned burning air seen by northern travelers, thinking perhaps of celestial fires that guided Apollo's chariot. Later storytellers would claim these were the lamps of Hyperborean priests lighting the god's return path each winter. Historians still argue whether such reports record natural phenomena or imagination sparked by snow and wine. Either way, the lights flicker above you now, and for a moment you believe both explanations at once. The mainstream fact hums beneath the wonder the aurora borealis occurs when solar particles collide with Earth's atmosphere, igniting color at the poles. Boreas again, the north wind, his breath visible at last. You can see why the Greeks gave direction a personality. Nature feels more intimate when it stares back. You walk through this shimmering corridor, the snow beneath your boots glittering like powdered glass. Somewhere far off, thunder murmurs not from clouds, but from the crackling sky itself. Every pulse seems timed to your heartbeat. For the first time you feel you might understand why Apollo loved this land. Here light isn't fixed. It dances, improvises, composes itself anew each second. Creation never ends, it rehearses forever. A fringe tidbit catches your imagination. Medieval chroniclers once claimed that the northern lights were reflections from great mirrors in the palaces of the Hyperboreans, angled to direct Apollo's radiance back toward Greece. The image makes you laugh, a divine satellite array, ancient edition. You picture serene northerners adjusting cosmic panels while muttering, "A bit to the left, or Athens won't get sunrise." The humor warms you against the cold. Still, the beauty of the aurora dissolves laughter into awe. Colors shift like emotion, anger red, peace green, nostalgia blue. The entire firmament becomes a living scroll, rewriting itself faster than thought. You realize the ancients didn't need to exaggerate. They only needed to describe badly to sound mythic. If this spectacle greeted them, who wouldn't invent a god to explain it? You recall how ancient temples aligned with solstices, their doorways designed to capture the sun's first ray or final farewell. Historians still argue whether these orientations served astronomical observation or spiritual symbolism. Perhaps both. You imagine Apollo's priests standing at Delphi or Delos, watching the faint northern glow at winter's edge, interpreting it as the god's signal I am returning. You can almost hear the gasp ripple through the crowd. Snow begins to fall not in flakes, but in long, crystalline feathers that shimmer as they descend. They melt before touching you, vanishing into steam scented faintly of salt and ozone. It feels like breathing in a storm's memory. The light around you grows so bright it casts shadows upward. You squint and notice faint patterns in the air. Spirals, geometric whispers. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe the universe doodles when it's bored. Another mainstream anchor steadies you. Ancient sailors indeed used northern lights for navigation, reading their direction and intensity as crude compasses. Even practical men couldn't resist giving them mystical names: sky serpents, flaming rivers, bridges of the gods. A seafarer watching this would see portals, not particles. You watch too, and portals feel plausible. Your reflection glimmers on an ice wall nearby, multiplied 100-fold by its facets. In each mirror, your eyes hold different colors, as though the aurora paints personalities. The effect unsettles you. Maybe that's the lesson Hyperborea never taught: perfection without reflection becomes monotony. But reflection without self becomes madness. Apollo's annual departure was perhaps self-preservation. He needed darkness to recognize his own light. Historians still argue whether the myth of the sun's rest beyond the north wind symbolized actual solar cycles or a philosophical retreat of intellect into stillness. You realize it can be both an astronomical truth wrapped in psychological wisdom. The universe teaches in riddles because that's the only way mortals remember. A sudden flare slices across the sky, a vertical shaft of white, so pure it erases color for a heartbeat. You think of it as the god's bowstring drawn taut. Somewhere an arrow of light releases, streaking southward. For all you know, it's the first dawn returning to Greece. The aurora swells, applauding silently. You laugh again, quietly, almost reverently. "All right," you whisper, message received. It's half prayer, half joke, as if Apollo could overhear through magnetic static. If he does, he answers not in words, but in the faint shimmer that lingers after the colors fade, like a hand resting briefly on your shoulder. The world dims back to polar twilight. You feel the temperature drop, yet something inside stays warm, a residue of radiance. You realize you've crossed another threshold, from legend into atmosphere, from scripture into science, without losing wonder. Hyperborea has trained you well. As you turn to leave, the lights pulse one last time. For a heartbeat, they form the outline of a lyre across the heavens. Then the pattern dissolves, and only darkness remains. You stand still, grinning into the cold, whispering to the void, "Play on wherever you go." You descend from auroral corridors into human rhythm again. Torches, sandals, drums. Here people do what people always do when the cosmos feels too large. They make a schedule. The island of Delos rises out of the Aegean like a polished gem, its quays bright with banners, its streets tuned to the pulse of processions. The air tastes of salt and rosemary smoke. On the marble terrace before Apollo's temple, you watch a wreath of laurel turn slowly in a priest's hands, green, as if cut from the heart of spring. The dancers keep time with reed pipes. The sea keeps time with them. Every step seems to echo a vow made in a language older than debt. The mainstream fact sets its feet firmly beside the spectacle. The Greeks anchored their devotion in recurring rites on Delos. The Delia honored Apollo with processions and boat parades. At Delphi, the Pythian Games returned every 4th year with music, poetry, and athletic contests. The victors crowned not with gold, but with bay leaves cut from sacred treatises. You can hear that choice in the crowd's murmur, triumph measured as grace, not metal. A crown that withers in your hands reminds you that winning is a mood, not a possession. You join the slow river of bodies climbing toward the altar. Children carry small baskets. Old men hum fragments of hymns that have survived empires. The smell of grilled fish pairs strangely well with the sweetness of new wine. Incense unspools in delicate threads. A chorus of Delian maidens stands near the temple doorway, their faces burnished by sunlight and the dust of story. When they sing, their voices braid like reeds in current. Then, with a smile that feels like magic, they shift timbre to imitate other tongues. Low Phrygian rumor, bright Athenian chatter, even a rough sailor's bark. You recognize a line from the old hymn, "They can mimic the voices of all people." It's a fringe tidbit with the ring of truth. The trick of the festival is to make the island feel like the world. The procession pauses at a palm, yes, the mythic one, under which Leto labored to birth Apollo. The tree's current trunk may be younger than the tail, but the shadow it casts is ancient enough. Wreaths brush its fronds, prayers lean against it like tired travelers. You notice bundles wrapped in straw laid at the altar's foot. Offerings said to come from far beyond Boreas. Their journey, so the priests declare, traced an invisible chain from tribe to tribe until they arrived here, where the Aegean can kiss them into immortality. Historians still argue whether those northern gifts record an actual relay of goods or a ritual fiction devised to give Delos a global heartbeat. You think of the amber you carry and decide myths are accurate in stranger ways than paperwork. The hymn swells, then folds. You are swept toward the shoreline, where a sacred ship rocks in sunlight. The Theoria vessel hull gleaming blue as a swallow's wing. Sailors bless the mast with oil. Officials tie white ribbons to the prow. In Athens, this ship's voyage once suspended civic doom. The city would not stain itself with executions while it traveled to Delos and back. Even philosophy waited on Apollo's tide. The story brushes your shoulder like a cloak, and you feel how ritual can rearrange the calendar of conscience. From island to mountain, the rhythm shifts. Delphi rises like a staircase to the sky. Terraces crowded with treasuries, facades flashing inscriptions that promise memory in stone. Here the Pythian festival gathers more than athletes. Lyre players tune strings until the air trembles like spun glass. Poets rehearse lines that smell of ink and ambition. A judge taps a bronze rod once, twice, and the theatre hushes. You sit among strangers who feel like kin, all of you breathing in the same anticipation. If Hyperborea taught you that light dances, Delphi teaches you that light listens. The first musician steps forward, Kythara balanced against his heart. When he begins, the melody threads its way through the stones and out over the valley. The notes have the clean geometry of a colonnade, shadowed now and then by a tender flourish, like a swallow turning in a corridor of wind. You remember that here victory is a stephanitic crown, a wreath, not a purse, and you try to picture explaining that to a modern sponsor. A quick smile slips out of you. Congratulations, your prize is a plant. Yet the crowd roars as if he's been handed the sun. You rise at intermission and wander the sacred way. Laurel leaves crackle underfoot. A priest slices fresh boughs, the scent sharp, medicinal. Pilgrims press narrow cakes into one another's hands, honey thick in the afternoon heat. A boy tosses a discus with such pure form that even the statues nod. Music bleeds into athletics, athletics into worship, worship into gossip. You catch whispers. Did you hear of the northern land where sickness fails? Did you see the swans riding the morning wind? The rumor of Hyperborea is a festival guest who never pays but always brightens the party. A woman with a basket of ribbons ties a strip around your wrist, white for clarity, green for return. For him, she says, nodding toward the mountain line where the god supposedly travels. The sun leans warm against your back. Somewhere a bell rings. A processional song gathers its syllables like oars dipping in water. The chorus moves again and you follow, because that's what ritual teaches. Meaning is made by walking in time with others. Historians still argue whether these festivals consciously mirrored distant vows, if Delos and Delphi copied the imagined rites of northern neighbors, or if Greeks simply projected themselves onto a mythic screen. You watch the dancers' feet, see how they mark a compass rose on the earth, north, south, east, west, then return to center. It feels intentional, like a map drawn with limbs. Whether imitation or projection, the effect is generous. the world is invited to sing along. A playful thought nudges you as the next Kitharode is announced with dramatic flair. Somewhere in the crowd, a merchant is calculating how many wreaths he could monetize if only bay leaves kept their shine. You grin at the idea of a pop-up shop called Eternal Laurel, No Wilting Guaranteed. The laugh is gentle, quickly swallowed by the next hymn, which descends like cool water. Near the temple you pause before a curious relic. An altar said to be fashioned from animal horns. Some say goat, some say even stranger. The arrangement is precise, almost mathematical, the curves fitting together like waves. It's a quirky image, sacrifice turned into architecture power, tamed and stacked. You place a hand on the warm stone, and the thought passes through you like a low-chord festivals are memory engines. They grind fear into rhythm, desire into dance. As dusk leans in, the final procession winds uphill. Torches gutter, shadows stretch long and ceremonial. Choirs answer one another across the slope, antiphony rising and falling like tide. The laurel-scented air thickens. Your wrist ribbon flutters like a small flag. Someone begins the old refrain about the gods' return, and the crowd sings it as if they could coax dawn to arrive by melody alone. You feel the Hyperborean undertone inside the words that promise of a north that keeps the south honest. You think of all the arrivals and departures folded into these rites, the sacred ship's launch, the god's imagined flight, the runner dashing through the stadium arch, the singer stepping into and out of silence. The structure of games and offerings has taught you a grammar subject. Light verb travels object us. In that syntax you find rest. One last joke flickers as the torches are doused. You picture Apollo backstage after the ceremony, sipping watered wine and muttering, "I came for quiet and got a music festival." The thought is affectionate, not irreverent. He may seek Hyperborea for rest, but he returns for this, the choreography of mortal hope. Night gathers without menace. The mountain breathes. Somewhere far above, a ribbon of aurora might be writing its cursive across the dark. Somewhere far north, a paradise might be humming. Here humans keep watch with wreaths and songs, offerings bound in straw, and ships painted in vows. You close your eyes and feel both places at once, the festival square beneath your feet and the silent meadow beyond the wind. The rhythm that connects them is older than prayer and as simple as walking in step. The festival light fades, replaced by sea mist and the smell of pitch. You stand at the edge of a dock where the world's maps blur into tide. Ahead, a thin-hulled ship waits its timbers, trembling with eagerness or fear. Sailors move like shadows, their lanterns drawing gold circles on the boards. Someone murmurs that this voyage will chase the edge of the north wind itself. You step aboard because how could you not? The deck tilts beneath your feet. Ropes hiss through pulleys. The mast creaks like an old prophet clearing his throat. A flare of dawn catches the sail, turning it into a slab of hammered bronze. The sea smells metallic, half alive. You realize this is what the ancient explorers must have felt, a mixture of devotion and foolishness, as if faith alone could balance the keel. The mainstream historical fact steadies the scene long before compass needles, Greek and later Roman navigators used the constellations to steer hugging coastlines when possible. Pytheas, you recall, sailed north from Massalia around 320 BCE and reported a gelatinous sea, most likely the Arctic pack ice. Historians still argue whether he truly reached that far or invented details to impress patrons. But his words, "a place where the sun sleeps only briefly," sound suspiciously like Hyperborea glimpsed through fog. You grip the gunwale, watching the water darken from indigo to ink. The sky folds low, pierced now and then by streaks of auroral green. The sailors whisper prayers to both Poseidon and Apollo, hedging bets. their captain a wiry man with eyes like wet basalt charts by instinct more than star. We follow rumour he mutters and rumour loves company. A fringe tidbit emerges from the gloom. Medieval Arctic maps sometimes placed 4 great rivers converging on a whirlpool at the pole, a maelstrom said to swallow reckless ships. The legend came from a 12th century monk named Nicholas of Lynn, whose Inventio Fortunata described a magnetic mountain at the world's top. Some later writers even equated it with Apollo's palace. You grin into the sleet if the god truly lives there. He must have the worst commute in creation. The wind sharpens, spray needles your face. You imagine how explorers wrapped their fears in theology. Every compass that spun unpredictably was proof of divine interference. Every sudden fog became the god's breath. Historians still argue whether faith propelled or paralyzed these voyages. Perhaps both belief provides direction, but too much of it blinds the helm. Hours pass, or centuries. It's easy to lose count when daylight bleeds without ending. The sailors sing low shanties, their rhythm matching the sea's slow heartbeat. You lean over the rail and glimpse icebergs shaped uncannily like statues. One even resembles a seated figure holding a lyre. Coincidence, you tell yourself, but the melody rising from the wind disagrees. For a moment, time collapses. You see a procession of ships from different ages, Viking Nars, Venetian galleys, Victorian steamers, all chasing the same mirage of a radiant north. Their wakes interlace like calligraphy. Somewhere in that swirling script hides Hyperborea's signature light folded into motion. A streak of humor cracks the solemnity. If modern travel influencers had been aboard, they'd already be posting sailing to the land beyond the north wind, no Wi-Fi 1010 sunsets. The thought makes you laugh out loud, startling a gull that explodes upward in indignation. Night, if this half-glow counts as night, brings a hush. The crew dozes where they sit, the sea sighing under them. You stay awake, tracing constellations across the mist. Each star feels both near and unreachable. You recall that sailors once believed the pole star was the eye of a god watching them. Maybe they were right. Every journey needs an audience, even a silent one. The next morning, ice closes around the hull like an uninvited hug. The captain swears softly and orders oars out. The water thickens. Paddles thump against slush. The ship groans but pushes through. The horizon wavers, revealing something impossible. A faint auroral halo resting on a ridge of rock that might be land. Hyperborea, or simply another mirage. Historians still argue whether early explorers saw actual ice ridges or optical illusions, the polar fata morgana that stacks sky upon sea. But for you, the vision suffices. The god's rumored refuge finally shows its silhouette, then dissolves. When at last the sea frees the keel, the captain turns south without a word. No one cheers. Even disappointment here feels sacred. You watch the ice fade behind you, replaced by rolling fog, by open water, by gulls who have never heard of perfection. In your pocket, the amber bead pulses faintly as if amused. The world remains the same, but you are not. You have learned that maps are just prayers written flat. The ship catches a tailwind. Waves rise green and jubilant. You think of all the explorers who mistook desire for geography and smile kindly at their ghosts. They were not wrong to try. Every voyage north is a confession that wonder outweighs reason, and even Apollo might envy that kind of faith. You lean against the mast as the horizon warms. The sails fill, the timbers sing. Somewhere behind the clouds, the god laughs softly, an echo that might also be thunder. Either way, it sounds like permission to keep sailing. You return to calmer waters, though not the ordinary kind. The horizon glows with that steady northern twilight that refuses to die, and under it the ship slides southward, leaving Hyperborea or the hope of it behind. You're back in the world of commentary now, where myths are not lived but interpreted. Voices follow you across the centuries. Alchemists, mystics, philosophers, ideologues, each claiming Hyperborea as their own. The mainstream fact comes first clean and cautious during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. European scholars rediscovered ancient myths and tried to anchor them in prehistory. They spoke of Aryan homelands, of polar suns, of forgotten continents beneath the ice. A few even turned Apollo's gentle pilgrimage into racial geography. The idea that wisdom and light originated in the north became a political compass, one that would later guide dark ships toward ruin. Historians still argue whether these thinkers misunderstood myth deliberately or innocently. You walk through that echoing archive, a dim library where parchment smells of ozone and regret. Each shelf contains a new appropriation: the Theosophists' Lemuria, the Nazis' Thule Society, the occultists' polar center of civilization. You pull down a cracked volume and read a passage that calls Hyperborea the nursery of divine blood. The words feel cold in your hand. You whisper an apology to the god of light, whose story was never meant to burn so fiercely. A fringe tidbit rises from the margins of another text in the 1930s. A self-proclaimed explorer announced he had located Hyperborea inside a hidden chamber beneath the Himalayas, accessible through meditative trance and well-timed mountaineering. His followers sold tickets to polar initiations under strobe lamps meant to mimic aurora. It's absurd, and yet part of you admires the conviction. People will build ladders to heaven from anything ice paper or neon. You step outside the metaphorical library into modern air. Cities hum, satellites blink. Still, Hyperborea glimmers through pop culture like a half-remembered lullaby. Painters render it as blue eternity. Musicians fold its name into synth albums. Online forums debate coordinates with the zeal of prophets. Even video games list it as a level between earth and dream. You realize myth never dies, it just updates its user interface. A moment of humor surfaces to steady you. If Apollo scrolled through social media, now he'd find hashtags like #Hyperborean lifestyle trending under pictures of minimalist cabins and vitamin D supplements. You laugh then sober. Every age disguises longing in fashion. Where the ancients prayed for eternal light, we settle for ring lights. Still, curiosity keeps the story alive. You meet the ghost of a 20th century linguist who argued that Hyperborea wasn't geographical at all. It meant simply beyond the realm of ordinary breath. He suggested the name signified heightened consciousness, not latitude. Historians still argue whether he was brilliant or merely poetic. Either way, his interpretation feels merciful. It returns the myth to the interior where no borders apply. You wander further into this mental bazaar. Stalls of belief crowd together. One sells crystals charged with polar energy, another offers self-help courses titled Awaken Your Inner Hyperborean. Their slogans shimmer in the same colors as the aurora you left behind. It's tempting to scoff, but you remember the warmth you felt in that northern paradise. Maybe they're not wrong, just approximate. Everyone wants to live somewhere better, and if they can't move there physically, they'll build it in language. Behind the noise, a quieter thread hums. Some modern historians attempt rehabilitation writing that the myth's persistence proves humanity's instinct to balance opposites, heat and cold, south and north, reason and rapture. Apollo's migration becomes psychology again, intellect retreating into silence so that art can renew. You smile. It's the same lesson you carried from Delphi, now phrased for an era of light pollution. You imagine the god listening to these debates amused. Perhaps he sits at a cafe table in the sky, sipping something radiant, reading think pieces about himself. Historians still argue whether I exist, he muses, but none of them write as beautifully as Pindar. The thought makes you grin. Even immortals appreciate good press. The ship beneath you rocks gently, though there's no visible water. You realize you've been sailing through interpretation itself, waves of thought rather than tide. Each swell lifts you into a new century. Each trough deposits you in someone's theory. You sense how easily light can be twisted into ideology, yet also how it always escapes diffusing through cracks to rejoin the honest sky. The wind shifts. Pages tear free from the library you left fluttering overhead like migrating birds. One lands at your feet. On it a single line glows faintly. Beware of freezing paradise into doctrine. You nod. That might be the truest thing Hyperborea ever said. A small joke unfreezes the solemnity. Maybe the Hyperboreans watching all this from their eternal spring-hold contests for most imaginative misuse of our legend. You picture them awarding gold laurel to the most outrageous theory, applauding politely before returning to their music. Even myths need entertainment. You breathe in the air laced with ink and salt. For all its distortions, the story endures because it answers something simple. When the world grows loud, we imagine a quiet north. When time accelerates, we dream of a place where hours refuse to age. Hyperborea is a mirror angled toward what we lack. You don't need to believe in it to feel its pull. The sky clears. The aurora you saw earlier has migrated southward. A pale smear above the horizon, faint but loyal. You realize that light once released never returns unchanged. The gods' long commute continues through every scholar, pilgrim, and charlatan who dares to follow. And now through you. You look at your reflection in the dark glass of sea, or thought it's hard to tell which, and for the first time you see not a traveler, but part of the current. Hyperborea was never a destination. It was contagion by wonder. Dawn unrolls like parchment over stone. The sea has faded behind you, replaced by plains where ancient temples and modern ruins sleep side by side. You walk through corridors of light and shadow where stones stand in deliberate silence. The air here feels charged not with memory, but with measurement. These are places where sunlight is treated like scripture. The mainstream historical fact anchors your step across Europe, and the Mediterranean sacred sites were built to catch the sun at specific times of year. At Stonehenge, at Newgrange, at Delphi itself, the solstice morning still threads light through corridors like a key turning in a lock. The builders did not just worship the sun, they choreographed it. Each dawn was a divine appointment kept with millimetric precision. Historians still argue whether this alignment came from pure observation or from shared mythological codes carried across migrations. You pause inside one such circle of stones. The wind runs through the gaps, low and tuneful. A lark lifts from the grass, tracing an invisible helix upward. You feel that same geometry in your bones, the elegant spiral of thought that connects sky to soil. Perhaps this was Hyperborea's true invention, architecture as conversation with light. A fringe tidbit drifts from an archaeologist's notebook you once read in the far north of Scotland. A standing stone bears carvings so faint they appear only during midsummer sunset. The image, some say, resembles a swan with spread wings. Others see a lyre. No one agrees, which means everyone is right. It's that sliver of ambiguity that keeps the heart racing. You kneel, pressing a hand to the cold rock. It hums faintly, as if still adjusting to the sun's return. You remember that early Greek temples often faced east, so the first morning ray would strike the cult statue's face. Delphi's own temple aligned perfectly with dawn during Apollo's festival. The design was not accidental. It was choreography for resurrection. You imagine the builders setting the foundation by starlight, arguing over degrees and compass bearings. A little more to the north, one might have said, That's where the god sleeps. You smile at their stubbornness. Even without satellites, they sought precision as devotion. Historians still argue whether the Greeks inherited this solar geometry from older civilizations. Egypt, Babylon, or some lost northern culture whispered about in Hyperborean terms. The question remains unsolved, and perhaps it should. Mysteries lose flavor when fully digested. The wind changes direction. Between two pillars, the sunlight gathers into a single blade, slicing through dust motes and landing squarely on a carved relief of Apollo's face. You watch the marble ignite in gold. The mouth, long silent, seems to breathe. The warmth spills across the floor toward you, and for a heartbeat you feel included in the alignment, like a traveler perfectly timed to an ancient equation. Then the light moves on, sliding toward the far wall where shadows wait patiently. Perfection lasts exactly as long as awareness. You realize this is why civilizations keep building to reenact the fleeting moment when cosmos and craftsmanship agree. You wander onward through ruins-turned observatories. Columns lean like tuning forks. At one site, a pool mirrors the sky so precisely that clouds hesitate before drifting over it. You think of Delphi's oracles gazing into water to glimpse prophecy. Maybe they were simply reading the reflection of light at just the right angle. Science and revelation are, after all, siblings separated by vocabulary. A playful thought intrudes as you examine a row of weathered stones. If Apollo graded these alignments, would he dock points for being a few degrees off Nice effort, you imagine him saying, but next time use a protractor. The humor steadies you, keeping reverence from hardening into stiffness. The path leads to a ridge where grass grows in circular patches greener where ancient fires once burned. Archaeologists say the soil still holds traces of copper and laurel ash offerings calcified into chemistry. You pluck a blade of grass and hold it up. The sun shines through revealing veins as intricate as handwriting. Nature, too, keeps records. Somewhere below, a modern city hums. Traffic glints like a procession of votive lights. Skyscrapers throw mirrored beams into the sky. Accidental obelisks repeating the old gesture. You smile, even glass towers worship without realizing it. Each sunrise they salute the horizon, each evening they shimmer in farewell. Hyperborea may have taught architecture to dream, but the dream persists through concrete and chrome. Historians still argue whether the alignment of monuments proves a lost solar cult. You suspect it proves something simpler. Humanity's addiction to calibration. To build is to ask the sun, "Do you still see us?" Every correct angle is a handshake with immortality. You climb higher until only wind and light accompany you. The ridge narrows, and at its tip stands a solitary column, half fallen, its base carved with faint concentric rings. You trace them with your fingers and realize they mimic the orbits of planets. Whoever carved this understood motion maybe better than you ever will. The grooves gather dust and sunlight in equal measure, a miniature cosmos maintained by neglect. The sky deepens to copper. You sit with your back to the stone, watching shadows stretch eastward. In the distance, the sea catches fire with reflected gold. For a moment, every ruin, every ridge, every leaf participates in one vast alignment. You feel the world inhale once quietly and exhale into stillness. A joke flickers as the first star appears somewhere. An ancient architect is bragging to his ghost friends. Sea still works. You laugh softly, the sound folding neatly into twilight. When darkness finally claims the stones, you rise. The air carries the faint metallic tang of approaching night. You glance once more at the column now silvered by moonlight, and it seems to bow. You bow back. Between reverence and amusement, the line blurs. Hyperborea taught you that much light loves those who can laugh without desecrating wonder. You turn south again, your shadow stretching long across the slope. Behind you, the stones keep their vigil precise, as always, waiting for the next dawn to renew the old equation between heaven and earth. And you, one more moving part in that geometry, keep walking. The ridgeline softens into rolling plains. Wind combs through long grass like fingers over harp strings, and each note smells of iron time and distance. You follow the whisper of rivers that braid silver across the land, tracing the paths of traders, nomads, and settlers who once ferried sunlight from east to west, north to south. You realize that you are walking through a living migration, echoes of footsteps that have not stopped for 10,000 years. The mainstream historical fact steadies you. The Scythians roamed here, the Cimmerians before them, the Celts further west, each carrying stories that bled into Hellenic imagination. Linguists can trace shared roots between Greek Sanskrit and Gaelic, proof that ideas travel faster than horses. Some scholars say Hyperborea was not an invention, but a memory, a cultural fossil of those ancient wanderings. Historians still argue whether the myth remembers the direction of movement. Did people migrate south from a northern homeland, or north toward the promise of light? The debate loops endlessly like a caravan circling its own campfire. You see their remnants even now, petroglyphs on basalt cliffs depicting chariots with radiant wheels, burial mounds aligned with sunrise, bronze plaques etched with spirals that look suspiciously like solar flares. The air hums with history's electricity. You crouch to brush dirt from a shard of pottery and find a swirl painted there, the same motif that adorns Delian mosaics and Celtic shields. It's the logo of the sun franchised across millennia. A fringe tidbit flutters from the annals of archaeology. Some researchers once discovered mummified Scythians whose tattoos mirrored Greek mythic symbols. Swans, lyres, arrows, icons of Apollo's story, carved into mortal skin centuries before Greece wrote his name. Coincidence? Perhaps the god did not travel north after all. Perhaps he came from here returning south only to be reimagined. You feel the thrill of inversion of myth turning inside out. The north isn't a destination, it's an origin disguised as exile. The trail winds into a valley lit by campfires. Each flame carries a different accent. Around them sit ghosts of tribes, Thracians chanting over drums, Celts tuning bone flutes, Persians tracing constellations on the ground. Their sounds weave together an accidental symphony that feels older than language. You recognize fragments of melodies that later became hymns in Greek temples. The migration is not just of people, but of sound. Even the wind learns new scales as it travels. You approach one fire and sit among the murmurs. An elder with hair like smoke gestures at the night sky. We follow that she says her finger pointing to the star the Greeks would call Polaris. It never moves. So neither do our stories, they only change singers. You nod. The compass is also a choir. Direction becomes song. Historians still argue whether mythic continuity implies shared ancestry or convergent invention. Did these people inherit Apollo's archetype or invent their own light-bringer independently? The uncertainty doesn't bother you. You've learned that truth often hides in overlap, not ownership. A mischievous thought slips in as you watch the tribes trade goods somewhere. A merchant is probably rebranding the sun for profit. Guaranteed warmth. Limited eclipse warranty. The joke earns you a few ghostly chuckles from the ancestors. Even eternity enjoys commerce done with charm. You walk among the fires, noticing patterns repeating 3 stones for cooking, 7 for ceremony. 12 around the chieftain's tent. The numbers echo, Greece, echo, Babylon. It's as if mathematics itself migrated, crossing rivers inside songs. You begin to see culture not as a chain, but a river delta, each mouth feeding back into the sea of myth. Farther along the camps thin into solitary cairns. You pass one topped with a carved disc of amber. The carving is crude, a man with rays for hair, but the resemblance is unmistakable. Apollo, centuries before his passport, said Greek. The realization leaves you dizzy. You sit down on a stone and let wind fill your lungs. Every breath tastes of shared ancestry. A fringe vision drifts through your mind. 19th century philologists searching for the Heimat, the original homeland of Indo-Europeans. They drew maps, argued over mountain ranges, imagined steppe riders inventing verbs by starlight. They wanted certainty so badly they mistook migration for purity. You understand now that movement, not stasis, is sacred. Even gods migrate because perfection grows stale in one place. The plains stretch ahead, shimmering with mirage. Herds move like clouds across the grass. You feel the pulse of hooves in the earth, a percussion older than written rhythm. Somewhere behind you the last campfire fades, and the landscape exhales. You've crossed not just geography, but genealogy, the flow of story through bloodlines and rumor. Each retelling carries traces of all the others, the way DNA remembers ancestors you've never met. Historians still argue whether mythology can serve as archaeology of the mind. You suspect it can. Every myth is a fossil of yearning compressed by time until it shines. Hyperborea may simply be the crystal formed when migration fossilized into memory. You hold your amber bead to the sunset, and the color matches perfectly. A soft joke bubbles up as twilight deepens. If all these tribes could see the academic conferences they've inspired, they'd probably sell tickets. Come here, scholars, debate our bedtime stories, wine provided. You grin into the dusk. Laughter, you've learned, travels farther than language. You crest one last hill, and there, stretching southward, lie the Aegean and the Mediterranean, luminous like pages waiting for ink. You can almost hear Delos breathing, waiting for the god's return. Behind you the wind sighs through the grass, whispering good night in a dozen forgotten dialects. You pause on the ridge, the whole map of myth spread below and behind. The migration is complete, not linear, but circular, like Apollo's own orbit. Every culture you've passed carried a fragment of the same song tuned to its own horizon. And now, standing here, you hum. The refrain, light leaves, light returns. The first star ignites. You bow to it, uncertain whether it's Polaris or the god's eye looking back. Either way, it feels like approval. The plains darken, but your path glows faintly ahead. A southern road lined with invisible memory. You step forward, knowing that every direction now leads home. The southern road softens under your feet, dust turning gold in the evening light. The wind now carries warmth, olive and myrrh, and the faint rattle of cicadas returning to life. You are back in the familiar hemisphere of myth, among vines, columns, and restless cities. But you move differently, as though part of you still listens north. Each breath feels bilingual, half in sunlight, half in snow. The god has traveled the same route for millennia. You can almost see him ahead, faint as a mirage chariot wheels sparking against horizon haze. He's thinner now, weary from carrying the world's metaphors on his shoulders, yet his smile endures. When he reaches the first Greek island, fishermen raise their nets and shout, not because they see him, but because instinct tells them the season of light has returned. The mainstream historical fact hums beneath the poetry the Greeks timed agricultural calendars, religious festivals, and navigation to the sun's annual motion. Each spring, the lengthening day marked Apollo's homecoming. Each autumn, his retreat. Civilization itself beat to his rhythm. Even today, equinoxes still anchor our year relics of his itinerary. Historians still argue whether the myth created the calendar, or the calendar created the myth. Either way, both keep time with longing. You reach a hill overlooking the Aegean. The sea throws back a light too bright to stare at directly. Villages bloom along the coast, their white walls catching every flare like miniature suns. You realize Hyperborea's perfection has not vanished. It's been diluted into ordinary brilliance. Paradise survived by decentralizing itself. Every warm window, every laughing child, every olive leaf flashing silver is a small republic of Hyperborea. You descend toward a temple half buried in time. The columns lean inward as if whispering secrets. Between them stands an altar darkened by centuries of offerings, wine, honey, olive oil, words. You add your own, a small bead of amber, the last remnant of the northern light. It glows for a moment, catching the sunset, then fades to a quiet gold content to rest among so many past intentions. A fringe tidbit surfaces whispered by the tour guides of legend. Some say a breeze still leaves the altar at dusk and travels north, carrying the scent of sacrifice to the gods' resting place. Sailors on the Black Sea claim they can feel it brushing their sails in early spring. Historians still argue whether these winds are meteorological coincidences or ritual inventions, but you like to think they're correspondence between hemispheres. You stand there until the sun touches the horizon. The light stretches into a final ribbon, thin as a lyre string. Someone once said that music is sunlight remembered when the day is gone. You believe it now. As the disk sinks, the sky turns wine dark, and a single star ignites where the chariot disappeared. For the Greeks, that was the sign the god has arrived home. You start walking again, south, through the vineyard terraces where night gathers gently. Villagers light lamps. Their glow wavers like a conversation across centuries. The first owl hoots a sound the ancients called the voice of wisdom. You take it as a greeting. A playful thought breaks the solemnity maybe. Apollo, upon his return, checks his temples like someone reviewing messages after vacation. Let's see who prayed, who misbehaved, who watered the laurels. The image makes you laugh aloud. The echo carries down the valley, startling a flock of doves into flight. Even divinity, you suspect, enjoys the comfort of routine. You reach the shoreline as the sea exhales mist. The waves lap around your ankles, cool and rhythmic. You kneel, scoop a handful of water, and watch moonlight tremble inside it. In that trembling, the northern lights flicker briefly, as if reflected from another hemisphere. Hyperborea has not vanished. It's folded invisibly inside the elements, waiting for anyone patient enough to notice. You remember every stage of the journey, Delphi's silence. The amber road, the auroral choir, the maiden's offering. They align inside you like constellations. You realize the myth has worked its alchemy. You began as an observer chasing a god's itinerary. You end as part of the orbit. Light departs and returns through you now. The wind freshens from the sea, carrying a hint of frost, though the night is mild. You close your eyes and listen, faint laughter, not cruel but cosmic, as if Apollo himself chuckles at how perfectly the world loops. That laugh becomes the tide, the heartbeat, the breathing of everything on. Then stillness, an exhale that empties the horizon. The stars settle into their positions. The moon leans lower, dragging its reflection through water. Somewhere behind that shimmer, the god is resting, already dreaming of next winter's road. Chapter. The night loosens its hold on form. Sentences stretch like waves. You feel the world relax, every edge softening. The hills fade into silhouettes. The sea becomes a sheet of murmured silver. Each breath you take carries both heat and chill, the dialogue of south and north, continuing quietly inside you. You think of Hyperborea now, not as a place, but as a tempo, the slow rhythm that steadies a frantic heart. When the day's glare becomes unbearable, You can close your eyes and feel that pale northern glow behind them, cool and constant. It waits patiently, needing nothing, promising only balance. Even the god, eternal commuter of light, seems to have found rest. His chariot is unyoked, his hands folded around the first silence of spring. The horses dream in their stable of auroras instead of thunder. Somewhere an oracle sleeps without questions, and a maiden's laughter echoes across the distance between offerings and acceptance. The wind drifts over you mild as breath. Its language is unhurried. It says that cycles are mercy disguised as repetition, that departure is another form of care. You listen until the words dissolve into rhythm, until rhythm becomes calm. When at last you open your eyes, the horizon is empty, yet complete. The sea glows faintly, the color of amber held against dawn. You whisper a thanks, not upward, but outward, to everything that kept you company on the road, stone, song, rumor, silence. The light answers by softening even further, like a curtain drawn gently across a window. You turn away from the water carrying only warmth, and the quiet conviction that Hyperborea never leaves anyone who has found it once. The air hushes. The story folds itself closed.